Good morning and welcome to Authentic Learning. My name is Jacqueline Gannon. I am an assistant professor of nursing in the Division of Health Care Sciences. And the first thing I want to share with you was this here. I find this saying really empowering at times. It says, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn." And that's kind of the premise behind authentic learning. Authentic learning basically takes us back to the hands-on learning idea. So the objectives for today's course is at the end of the program, you should be able to define what authentic learning is, differentiate traditional learning versus authentic learning. You should be able to describe characteristics of authentic learning. You should be able to demonstrate your role as an educator in applying authentic learning and applying this authentic learning to your classroom. So a little bit about me, where I've come from. So hands-on learning has been the foundation of my learning throughout my lifetime. If you go all the way back, I actually started out in high school in career and tech education at Upper Bucks. Now it's Upper Bucks Career and Tech. And I went and got my certified nursing assistant. So I went into healthcare, into the healthcare tract, and graduated from high school with my certified nursing assistant certification. I then came up to Lehigh Carbon Community College and earned my LPN. And I have continued my course throughout the years, earning my RN, my BSN in nursing, my master's in nursing, and I'm currently working on my doctorate in nursing. My first education full-time job, I was a clinical adjunct for several of the area schools before I taught full-time at Lehigh Carbon Community College. But prior to that, I taught at LCTI next door. And the idea at LCTI was definitely hands-on. The students learned a lot of skills and how to apply those skills to their patients. I have wore many hats in education. So I was a diabetic educator for a while. And again, like I said, I have earned my master's in nursing education, and I am towards the end of my doctoral degree. So what is authentic learning? Now, if I were presenting this live via a synchronous method, I would ask everyone to put in the chat what authentic learning is. So if you want to pause for a second and come up with your own ideas of what authentic learning is and see how you did. So the definitions from the literature is it's real world learning. And I'm sure you've heard that before. Learning by doing, experiential learning. I have a couple of literature pieces that explain their view on what authentic learning is. Lowell and Campion in 2020, they refer to it as learning by doing. It's an instructional method, involves learning experiences, and it's connecting classroom to real world issues or problems or applications. So you see that in the aviation industry. So you're learning about all of the backgrounds of aviation, and then you're applying that when you get in and start doing your flying. Your first, you're going to be flying with your instructor, and then you're going to be doing your solo flights. You will see that in culinary arts. You need to understand the theory behind making a cake. You need to understand all the ingredients. What does baking soda do? What does flour do? Making a cake and not greasing the pan the first time versus making a cake and greasing the pan. So you're going to learn about that And then you're going to do that. Smith and Kennedy, they said it's presenting content relevant to the role of the professional nurse in a manner that mimics how the information will be used in actual nursing practice. We have a really amazing simulation lab. If you haven't seen it, it's we actually have 3. We have one in Maine in SH11, and then we have one up in Donnelly, and we have one up in Morgan. So the students will learn in a non-threatening, safe environment. They'll give medications. They will treat critical lab values. They'll insert Foleys. They will suction a patient. They will change dressings. And they'll do that in a safe environment. And then they will go into the clinical setting, and then they will work with their instructor, and they will do that in the real world. Stein, Isaacs, and Andrews in 2006 said authentic learning is personally relevant from the learner's perspective and situated within appropriate social context. So this relevance needs to be there. The why am I doing this? Does this really matter? So I'm going to go back to aviation, for example. And so a student says, I just want to learn how to fly a plane. I want to fly a plane. I want to work for Delta, and I want to take people to their dream destinations. That's what I want to do. Why am I reading chapter 1 about the parts of a plane? Well, hopefully they would know why they're reading about the parts of a plane, but you kind of get my idea. So they want the learner needs to see relevance in what they're doing. So here I took a chart and I put the 2 different views. And I'm not going to read all these word for word for you, but if you look on the left-hand side, you have your traditional classroom. Learning is based on repetition. That's always key. So I think back to when I learned, right? We all stood up, and maybe I'm going to be dating myself a little bit, but we stood up and we had to recite the multiplication tables. Or we had a list of 20 vocabulary words and we were given a vocabulary test. Maybe they combined it with your spelling test, right? The teacher's role was very directive and very authoritative. And students worked primarily alone. There wasn't a lot of collaboration. Now, the constructivist classroom, which is what authentic learning is based on, the students are involved. The learning is interactive. The student is building. It's a building block. You're starting off with your foundation, like making your cake. You're starting off with your foundation and you're adding to that, making a house, building, I don't know, a fashion designer, starting clothing. I'm just trying to think off the cusp here. The key students are collaborative. They're working in groups. We cross disciplines. I'm going to play this little video here. Ashley Sterling is going to talk about authentic learning from her perspective.
The practice of learning through experience is, it has long existed across higher education. The theory of experiential learning itself dates back to the 1970s, which is informed by many other theories on experience that came out much earlier than that. Saying that, the popularity of experiential learning and attention on advancements in experiential learning are growing across higher education, provincially, nationally, and internationally. There's a number of reasons for that. I think as we're looking to enhance the learning experiences for our students, we're starting to embrace a range of pedagogical approaches, and experiential learning theory is one pedagogical approach that we use in higher education. Also, as students are looking to enhance the relevance of their education and are looking to make meaningful connections between what they're learning in the classroom and what their future practice may be, it's a pedagogical approach that also resonates with the benefits that the students are looking for in their higher education experience. With the increased discussions and attention to experiential learning theory across higher education, many practitioners are now starting to ask, what is it? And what can we do to help facilitate these learning experiences so that they are most optimal for the students that we're working with? Despite what people may hope, simply experiencing something is not necessarily educational in itself. In order for an experience to be educational, it must be deliberately structured and integrated with specific learning outcomes in order for that learning to be most effective. There's numerous of theories that can be used that exist on student learning, adult education, and how people learn through experience more broadly. One of the most popular theories that we see used across higher education is Kolb's experiential learning theory. So Kolb's experiential learning theory refers to a cycle of experiential learning that suggests that in order for learning to be most effective, students should hit the 4 learning modes of concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. So ultimately what that means is that in order for learning to be most effective, students need to get hands-on experience. They need to do something. This is why we call it learning by doing. They need to take a step back and they need to reflect on the experience. They need to think about it. They need to integrate that with theory. So they need to think about their experience in light of previous knowledge and understanding. And they need to have opportunities to test out their ideas and try new things. So what constitutes experiential learning in higher education? Well, technically any experience that a student engages in has the potential to be an experiential learning activity. What makes it experiential learning is whether the students learn through that experience and whether it hits the tenets and the learning modes of experiential learning theory. So Kolb's experiential learning cycle in particular. Some examples of experiences that students engage in could be an engaging lecture, a guest speaker. It could be a field experience. It could be participation in student governance. It could be a party that students go to that goes awry, and they learn through that experience. Ultimately, though, as educators, when we think about structuring experiential learning activities in higher education, what we're really talking about, though, is creating deliberately structured experiences that are tied to intentional learning outcomes. Those learning outcomes can be tied to broader program or course learning outcomes in an academic context, or they could be tied to transferable skills such as skills of professionalism, literacy, etc., etc. Oftentimes, though, it's a combination of both academic and transferable skills that we ground the learning outcomes of experiential learning in. Some examples of specific activities exist across curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular domains. There's really no limit to the environment in which they may be facilitated. In a co-curricular domain, we think of ideas such as hackathons, work study, participation in student governance, peer mentorship as just some examples. In a curricular context, you have clinical placements, practica, co-op, field experiences, and then extracurricular are all the wealth of experiences that students engage in outside the classroom and outside of the structures and organizations of what happens on campus, but maybe integrated in some way to facilitate an educational experience during their time here.
All right, I just want to share this quick traditional versus authentic learning. I thought this video was kind of funny. If you think back to how many of us were taught in school.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the Anyone? Anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So hopefully we are not teaching in that respect anymore. All right, preparing for today's world. So we as educators have realized that those traditional methods, like I just shown you, where the teacher is standing up and the student is basically just sitting there listening and taking in and then regurgitating that information back on a quiz or a test, is not useful for successful transition from classroom to the work environment. There is no universal model. Educators have to adopt what works for them and the students. And I have here this blog of characteristics. Let's see. I just want to share this with you. And this goes on. I thought this was really interesting. It talks about 9 characteristics of authentic learning. So it comes down here and it talks about it being real world learning, like I talked about. Interdisciplinary, collaborative. Back in the day, we didn't really, if we worked amongst our groups, never did, did nursing go out and work with physical therapy or with criminal justice. I have to tell you a quick story about how I used to collaborate, because that was a big thing when I taught at LCTI, was collaboration. And we had a big collaboration day that we did work with criminal justice. And that's why I use that as my example. And we had pretty much an all-day activity. We had stations. So it was actually healthcare, nursing. It was the dental lab, and it was the law. And we had 9 stations. The students were put in the groups, and we would go, we had morning and afternoon labs, and they would go from station to station. And we started off, and we would start off with the story about I want to say it's the bone cemetery, it's where you can go. It's where all these bones are. It's in Pennsylvania. I don't personally care to go there. I'll find out what that place is for you in a minute. It's not coming to me at the moment. But anyway, the students would go from station to station to station, and they would have like a bone dig. We'd have the skeleton, and they would have to be able to identify parts of the skeleton. It was really, really neat. And then we had, again, it's dating myself a little bit, we had Scott Grimm, who used to be the coroner for Lehigh County before he retired, and he would come and he would give a talk, and he was really engaging, and he would give a talk to the students about the role of the coroner. So anyway, excuse me, these are different characteristics. So we talked about real world learning, hands-on, interdisciplinary, student-directed learning. I do a lot of times flipped classroom. So I'll give the students the recorded lecture ahead of time, give them time to read it, and then we start off with a case study, or I let the students, okay, so here's what we're talking about. And I'll put them in groups. They'll read about, they'll look at it, and then they will come back and describe it. And it's a particular area. And I've used that when I talk about endocrine disorders. I'll put them in different groups, and each one will share a different endocrine gland and talk about that. Open-ended query, exploration and collaboration, community discourse, higher order thinking, mastery of key concepts, and flexibility. So just to share with you some of the characteristics. And this, I just kind of made a word wall to just really drive in the different elements of real world, or different characteristics like I talked about. So you can see here problem solving, inquiry, flexibility, collaboration, student directed active process, critical thinking, real world, for just to give you a few. So the educator's role, what is our role as educators to applying this idea of authentic learning in the classroom? So designing activities that match as nearly as possible to the real world tasks is our job. We want our students to be able to hit the ground running. What I really like about community college in versus a 4-year program is the students are given what they need to be successful, at least in my aspect, to be a competent entry level registered nurse. All right. If they want to take that further, they want to go for their bachelor's degree, then they're going to start taking other courses, history, literature, and different things like that. But for now, we want them, there's these core courses that they need, and they will leave if they follow the trajectory of the course. In 24 months, they will have their registered nurse. Challenges should be complex and ambiguous and multifaceted and requiring sustained investigation. So you want to challenge them. Many students, act like they don't want to be challenged, but they really do. You challenge them and you get them out of their comfort zone. Reflection is huge. Doing this without reflection is only doing half of the work. So you want them to reflect, and I have my students reflect. Every year they have to at the end of the semester, midterm, and then at the end of the semester they have to reflect on how they're meeting the objectives, and then I grade them. They grade themselves, and if they don't really give me a lot of feedback, I actually send it back to them and say, when you're not putting a lot there, it's telling me you didn't learn a lot. And if you didn't learn a lot, then maybe you might not be passing the clinical portion of this course. And then they're like, oh yeah, I learned. And then they add all kinds of stuff onto it. Teamwork, we talked about that. I think we could spend an entire day talking about teamwork in amongst itself. And students have to draw on multiple sources and negotiate among multiple perspectives. We are in a very diverse world, a very diverse community. My classroom alone, just if you look at basic demographics, I have traditional students, students who are living at home, are single. I have students that are non-traditional in their 30s, 40s, and sometimes even into their 50s. They have children, adult children. They might be in the sandwich generation, so they have children. They're caring for their aging parents, and they are working full time. So many different, and that's just a demographic. I mean, I could go into all kinds of other different perspectives as well. And they want to, the role is that they are making contributions that are meaningful. Okay, meaningful. There's a purpose behind it. So aligning with LTRIC's college-wide and student learning competencies, I put here our college-wide competencies, and making sure that when you're incorporating authentic learning, think about our college-wide competencies. Are they in alignment with those? So thinking critically, absolutely, absolutely. We're having them think outside the box. Remember that student-driven, that intercollaborative, that making it meaningful, communication, applying quantitative reasoning. Are they measuring? Are they reflecting? Participating cooperatively within a team. I think we've already talked about that. Using current technology effectively. I mean, I give a project every year and the students have a group they are put into, and I teach maternal newborn nursing. There is no way I'm gonna go through every single disorder, complication, problem in the 14 weeks that I have the students. I always tell them I need another 14 weeks to finish, right? So I have a list of things that I really only just touch the surface on. And the students are put into groups and they have to create what's called an SBAR report. They have to create a case study on a patient with, say, with a baby with shaken baby syndrome. So they have to create a scenario of a baby that comes into the emergency room from, having shaken baby syndrome. And I have a rubric and criteria they have to meet. But one of the things they have to do is they have to put it in a PowerPoint and they have to embed a video. There's like certain things they have to do. So amongst each other, they've really learned to use technology well. Again, they have to write a one-page summary on this. So applying information for as far as their literacy skills, I want to see it in an APA format. Analyze human diversity, apply scientific reasoning, and evaluating ethical aspects. So looking at our college-wide competencies as you're applying these authentic learning really, really helps. Experiential learning, service learning, and that doesn't necessarily, that can be across anything. There are so many opportunities for service learning for our students, and it can be among anything. One of LTRIC's value statements is civic engagement and service to encourage leadership and civic responsibility through academic studies, student activities, and community participation. Service learning is defined as a method of teaching and learning, combining community service with the classroom learning. An example that my students participate in my maternal newborn class is they do two things. Well, it's on hold right now due to COVID, but they used to participate in the West End Food Pantry. I'm a volunteer. I'm an very active volunteer for the West End Food Pantry. So my students the day students go on Fridays and do all the packing, and there's a lot more to it. And they have a reflection, they have things they have to answer that go along with that. And then the evening weekend group, they actually are participating in the distribution of the goods to the clients. So it's a really great experience. And then they also go to the Salvation Army and they work with the after school program with the children there. So it's really, really nice. And in the lower level courses, ADM 150, 160, and so forth, they have to find their own community. They get one day built into their clinical schedule for a service learning day. And that could be anything that they choose as long as it mirrors the objectives of the course. So if they're in a med surg course, going to a pediatric clinic or going to, a walkathon for cystic fibrosis wouldn't be in alignment, but going to a walkathon for the American Heart Association would completely be in line with that med surg course. And I have a link here for the professional development and service learning. I just wanted to share this. Oops. And then we have this, what is service learning? What are the goals? And some different examples and steps to implement service learning into your course. So just if you were not familiar with that, I just want to bring that to your attention. And that is actually my students participating at the West End Food Pantry. So I just wanted to share that with you. So service learning in a web design course. How do we put that into a web design course, right? We're online. So I found this from Mississippi State University. And this was a web design course as a final project that the students had to put together a service learning. So I kind of minimized it for you just so that, I didn't go over the whole thing. It was really well done. So I have all the references here for you. So you can actually go back and read this whole study if you're interested in how they put this together, how Lee and Wilder put this together. So the purpose was to explore student can't speak, perceptions of their service learning and to investigate the challenges and concerns encountered by students throughout the service learning group project. So it would start off with 3 to 5 students. They had to apply the knowledge and skills they learned to create a website for their community partner. They had 7 weeks to do this. They really valued this and the responsibility in the service learning project and had a really positive experience. The community participation aspect of this course helped me to see how the subject matter I learned can be used in everyday life. So there's your everyday life, your real world experiences. There's your authentic learning. I felt a personal responsibility to meet the needs of our community partner. That is huge. That speaks volumes. I was so intrigued by United Way that I reached out to them to see how I could get involved. Luckily, I gained a marketing internship with them that summer. So how can you apply this into your own classrooms? If we were here together in Zoom, I was going to randomly assign you to a breakout room, and I was going to have you take 15 minutes, and I wanted you to come up with an activity that you could assign your students to incorporate authentic learning in the classroom. So think about this on your own, and you can even reach out to your fellow colleagues and say, let's try this authentic learning. I went to Jackie Gannon's presentation. It really sound cool. It sounded like something I would really want to do. And let's take a look at it. So how can you incorporate this into your course? How would you evaluate it? Because you want to always be evaluating it. What criteria would you give? You want to have a rubric. You want to have expectations. What service learning could you include? How would it work with what you're teaching? How would it align with the college-wide student learning competencies? How would it align with your own learning outcomes for your program? And then I was going to have everybody come back and share. So I was going to, if I was doing this live with you all, I was going to break it down and I was going to make one group Accounting 160, Principles of Accounting 1. The second group was going to be Art 219, Digital Photography 2. The third group was going to be Business 221, Principles of Marketing. And the fourth group was going to be English 105, Research and Composition. So I was going to put you in those groups, and that was the course you were teaching. And then I wanted to see how could you incorporate what I just went over with you in those 4 courses. There are my references for you. And any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I should have put my email address. It's jgannon@lccc.edu. Again, jgannon@lccc.edu. And after you've completed this course, I will send you a link to SurveyMonkey for you to evaluate this course for me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you are able to take something away from this and apply it to your classroom. Have a great day.